How you doing, guys? And today I wanted to discuss something about guns in other countries. I know there's been a lot of recent shootings and stuff like that, and people have been talking about gun control. So I just wanted to go over some facts for you, and I'll let you decide from the facts. Now, this is a myth. Countries with strict gun control have less crime. Fact, okay? In America, we can demonstrate that private ownership of guns reduces crime. But from country to country, there is no correlation between gun availability and violent crime rate. Consider, to use detailed data, you can contrast the per capita homicide rate with the per capita gun ownership rate between different industrialized countries. In fact, countries with the strictest gun control laws also tend to have the highest homicide rates. According to the UN, as of 2005, Scotland was one of the most violent countries in the developed world, with people 3 times more likely to be assaulted than in America. Violent crime there was doubled over the past 20 years. 3% of Scots have been victims of assault compared to 1.2% of Americans. And we have more guns in America. The major survey completed in the past 20 years or more provides no evidence of any relationship between the total number of legally held firearms in society and the rate of the armed crime. Nor is there a relationship between the severity of controls imposed in various countries or mass of bureaucracy involved with many control systems that are apparent ease of access to firearms by criminals and terrorists. Even if we examine just firearm ownership and firearm homicide by country, we see no correlation between the two. Switzerland is a good example. They have a relatively lenient gun control for Europe and has the third lowest homicide rate of the top 9 major European countries and the same per capita rate as England and Wales. So Switzerland has the third lowest crime rate in Europe. Indeed, the Swiss basically have a military rifle in every single closet. Everybody who has served in the army is allowed to keep their personal weapon even after the end of their military service. We don't have as many guns, Brazil, as the United States, but they use them more. Brazil has a mandatory licensing legislation and maximum personal ownership quotas. It now bans any new sales to private citizens. Their homicide rate is almost 3 times higher than the United States. So Brazil has a homicide rate 3 times higher than the United States, and they don't have any guns, or they ban them, or they limit them very, very, very high. In Canada, around 1920, before there was any form of gun control, their homicide rate was 7% of the U.S. rates. By 1986, after they banned guns, and after significant gun control legislation, Canada's homicide rate was 35% of the U.S. rate, a significant increase. In 2003, Canada had a violent crime rate more than double that of the United States, 963 versus 475 per 100,000. One study of Canadian firearm law and homicide rates spanning 34 years failed to demonstrate a beneficial association between legislation and firearm homicide rates for 3 major gun control bills. Many of the countries with the strictest gun control have the highest rates of violent crime. Australia and England, which have virtually banned gun ownership, have the highest rates of robbery, sexual assault, and assault with the force of the top 17 industrialized countries. The crime rate is 66% higher in 4 Canadian prairie provinces than in the northern U.S. states across the border. Strict controls over existing arms failed in Finland. Despite needs-based licenses, storage laws, and transportation restrictions, Finland experienced a multiple killing school shooting in 2007. Now here's another myth. Britain has strict gun control and thus a low crime rate. Since gun banning has escalated in the UK, the rate of crime, especially violent crime, has risen. Ironically, the use of firearms and crimes in the UK has doubled. They ban guns, but they still have the crimes that are being committed is doubled, and there are more guns being used since handguns were banned. Britain has the highest rate of violent crime in Europe, more so than the United States or even South Africa. They also have the second highest overall crime rate in the European Union. In 2008, Britain had a violent crime rate nearly 5 times higher than the United States, 2,034 versus 446 per 100,000 population. 67% of British residents surveyed believe that as a result of gun and knife crime, the area they live in is not safe as it was 5 years ago. UK street robberies soared 28% in 2001. Violent crime was up 11%, murders 4%, and rapes were up 14%. The trend continued in the UK in 2004 with a 10% increase in street crime, 8% increase in muggings, and a 22% increase in robberies. In 1919, before it had any gun control in the UK, had a homicide rate of 8% of the U.S. rate. By 1986, and after enacting significant gun control, the rate was 9%, practically unchanged. Fact: nothing in the statistics for England and Wales suggests that either stricter gun control on handguns prior to 1997 or ban imposed since then have controlled access to firearms by criminals. Comparing crime rates between America and Britain is fundamentally flawed. In America, a gun crime is recorded as a gun crime. In Britain, a crime is only recorded when there is a final disposition, a conviction. All unsolved crimes in Britain are not reported as gun crimes, grossly undercounting the amount of gun crime there. To make matters worse, British law enforcement has been exposed for falsifying criminal reports to create falsely lower crime rates, in part to preserve tourism. An ongoing parliamentary inquiry into Britain into a growing number of black market weapons has concluded that there are more than 3 million illegally held firearms in circulation, double the number to be believed to have been 10 years ago, and criminals are more willing than ever to use them. 1 in 3 criminals under the age of 25 possess or have access to a firearm. Handgun homicides in England and Wales reached an all-time high in 2000, years after a virtual ban on private gun ownership. More than 3,000 crimes involving handguns were recorded in 1999 to 2000, including 42 homicides, 310 cases of attempted murder, and 2,561 robberies and 204 burglaries. Handguns were used in 3,685 British offenses in 2000 compared with 2,648 in 1997, an increase of 40%. Of the 20 areas with the lowest number of legal firearms, 10 had an above-average level of gun crimes. Of the 20 areas with the highest levels of legal gun, only 2 had armed crime levels above average. There's another fact. Between 1997 and 1999, there were 429 murders in London, the lowest 2-year figure for more than 10 years. Nearly 2/3 of these involve firearms, in a country that has virtually banned private ownership of guns. Figure that one out. Now, also in Australia, gun control is curbing crime. That's a myth. In Australia, homicides were falling before the Australian firearm ban. In 7 years before and after the Australian ban, the rate of decline was identical, down to 4 decimal places. Homicides dropped steeply starting in 2003, but all of this decline was associated with non-firearm and non-knife murders, fewer beatings, poisonings, drownings. Crime has been rising since enacting a sweeping ban on private ownership in Australia. In the first 2 years after the ban, government statistics showed a dramatic increase in criminal activity. 2001 to 2002, homicides were up 20%. From the inception of firearm confiscation on March 27 to 2000, the numbers are as follows. Firearm-related murders were up 19%. Armed robberies were up 69%. Home invasions were up 21%. The sad part is that in 15 years before the national gun confiscation, firearm-related homicides dropped 66%, and firearm-related deaths fell 50%. So it was lower before they did this banning of the guns. And we see this constantly. There's so many multiple facts. Here's one for Japan. Japan has strict gun control and a less violent society. That's a myth. In fact, Japan, the total number murder rate is 1 per 10,000. In the U.S., there are 3.2 murders per 100,000. People each year buy weapons other than firearms. This means that even if firearms in the U.S. could be eliminated, the U.S. would still have 3 times the murder rate of Japanese. Fact, illegal. Side street gun makers thrive in the Philippines, primarily handcrafting exact replicas of submachine guns, which are often the simplest type to manufacture. Estimates that almost half of all guns in the Philippines are illegal. Now, here's another myth. The United States has the highest violence rate because of lax gun control. Fact, top 100 countries for homicide do not include the United States. The top 10 countries all have near or total firearms bans. The U.S. has the highest rate of firearm deaths among the 25 high-income countries. False. 60% of American gun deaths are suicides, and U.S. has the suicide rate 11% higher than international averages. This accounts for most of the differences. The U.S. has a violent crime rate lower than 12 of the 7 industrialized countries, due in part to the 2.5 million annual defense gun sales. Here's another myth. They're saying that we're getting all the guns are coming from the United States to Mexico. The United States is a source of 90% of drug syndicate guns in Mexico. False. This is often misquoted data by the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, who said 90% of the firearms have been interdicted or transported to Mexico from the United States. Thus, 90% of the number only includes firearms American and Mexican police stop and transport. 90% number was derived from the number of firearms successfully traced, not the total number of firearms criminally used. For 2007 to 2008, Mexican officials recovered approximately 29,000 firearms from crime scenes and asked the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms for traces of 11,000. Of those, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms could only trace 6,000, of which 5,114 were confirmed to have come from the United States. This 83% of the guns recovered in Mexico have not come from the United States and have not been traced to the United States. Mexican drug syndicates can buy guns anywhere. For relatively underpowered civilian rifles coming from the United States, drug runners would pay 300 to 400% above the market price. Thus they can and are buying guns around the world. Mexican drug cartels with $40 billion in annual revenues have military armament that includes hand grenades, grenade launchers, armor-piercing ammunition, anti-tank rockets, and assault rifles smuggled in from Central American countries. These are infantry weapons bought from around the world and not civilian rifles. They're fully automatic submachine guns. Mexico seizes 2,000 guns a day from the United States. This is a myth. The Mexican Attorney General's office reports seizing a total of 29,000 weapons in 2007 and 2008, or about 14,500 weapons a year. And that is all types of weapons, regardless of the country of origin. So they're seizing 14,500 weapons a year, and that's from everywhere, from every country they get them, South America, everywhere. The total number of seized weapons would be closer to 1,460,000 if they seize 2,000 guns a day, which they do not. Thousands of guns go into Mexico from U.S. every day. False. In a Senate committee testimony, Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms said the number was likely worse to be in the hundreds. In fact, evidence. The average for all firearms seizures was closer to 40 to 50 a day, and only a fraction of these guns came from the United States. Now, these are some of the stats that the anti-gunners don't want to talk about, because they firmly believe that guns cause all this. But you're looking at most of the countries they banned guns, they have higher crime rates, especially the Britain and UK. And Switzerland has the third lowest crime rate in the UK. So figure it out. But I wanted to bring up some of the statistics. Thanks a lot. Have a great